Hey guys, welcome back to the third review in the On Wax review series. Of course, I figured now would be a better time than ever to talk about the latest release from the English rock band Arctic Monkeys, The Car. This is their 7th studio album ever since their debut in 2006. Whatever people say I am, that's what I'm not. And the Arctic Monkeys have been a very, very interesting band, to say the least, and somewhat divisive in many ways, because first off, I'm going to say I don't think I've talked too much about Arctic Monkeys on my channel, but I think from what I've heard, they're easily the best rock band to debut in the 21st century. I mean, there's not really much competition anyways. So I mean, those first 3 records, whatever people say I am, that's what I'm not. Favorite, Worst, Nightmare, which I actually just bought on vinyl, and Humbug, I think are all great records in the alt-rock scene. I mean, nobody sounded like these guys. They took all their eclectic influences and fused it into this banging, raging combo of clever lyricism, hard-driving riffs, so much to admire. Just Alex Turner's incredible wordplay, especially at the beginning of their career. But I think once you got to Suck It and See and AM and Tranquility Base Hotel, you just saw this gradual, it wasn't even gradual, it was just like a dip down in quality. So, granted, obviously after the last album, which I think is their worst, I was really hoping that Arctic Monkeys were going to bring something to the table quite interesting, like they had in the past, and I was really looking forward to what Alex Turner and the gang had to give us this time around, and yeah, I can't say it was anything too crazy. What I will say about this band is they are always trying something different, especially after the first 3 albums. I think that sounded pretty similar, but I think were the most consistent in quality. They've always tried to branch out and do different styles and explore new sounds. And I really appreciate that more than anything, because I feel like if you just kind of stagnate as an artist and keep doing the same thing over and over again, I mean, I don't know how much gratification you're going to get out of it. But there comes a time and place where I think it's time to hang it up, and I don't know, I feel like with this album, first I will say it's very, very different from all the other Arctic Monkeys records, because it's very orchestrated, and I think the production is very pleasant. It's also more funky than their other albums, but on that note, I feel like it hardly goes anywhere with that. And I think my biggest problem with this album is, despite the stylistic shift and everything in between, I feel like this album is virtually hookless. And I don't necessarily think you have to have hooks all of the time to make an album great. I mean, jazz records, they have some, but, you're just there for the improvisation. Obviously, this is not jazz. But I think there comes a point in time where, even if it sounds nice, it sounds pretty vapid in regards to the arrangements, because these arrangements are so mid, it's unbelievable. At least for the most part, I just think that there's really nothing that memorable about them melodically. And I think another thing that annoys me about Alex Turner as a songwriter is just the way, because obviously his lyrics are very, very quick and very clever. But I feel like if there comes a point in time where he tries to be too clever with his lyrics and he kind of out-Turners himself, as I like to call it, and I feel like he loses that relatability to his audience. And this happens all the time on these recent Arctic Monkey records. He's just putting these words together that sound bizarre in combinations that only he would ever think of. But it just sounds like he's trying too hard at this point. And I definitely feel like that comes across this way on a lot of this record. But let's get into the songs on this album. Obviously, the opening track, There Better Be a Mirrorball, which was the first single that debuted off this album. And I listened to it a couple months ago. I thought it was good. I like basically what he's talking about in the song, the kind of this dissipation of this relationship and just trying to make sure that that's what they want. And I just think, obviously, the orchestration is quite interesting. When I first heard it, I was like, oh, this is good. This is obviously quality stuff, but I don't really see where this is going. Well, I kind of did, because I was like, if this is what this album sounds like, it's going to be incredibly mid. Lo and behold, here it is. But I do like this song, and obviously I think I like a lot of what Alex Turner's getting at on this album in general. And the next track, I Ain't Quite Where I Think I Am, that was not one of my favorites. I think the backing vocals are kind of annoying and over-exaggerated. It really takes me out of the song. But I also just think that it's, yet again, another one of his super mid-arrangements on here that I don't think really goes anywhere musically. And then we have Sculptures of Anything Goes, which I think I really love. I think it features some of Alex Turner's most beautiful use of falsetto on any of the records. But I think it's also one of their most boring and uninteresting songs. Because I appreciate what he's getting at, talking about like how the band has changed stylistically so many times and how everyone expects them to go back to their old style, but that's not really what Alex is preoccupied with emulating. That's not where he is in his point in this life. But if everything that he's preoccupied with sounds like this, like, honestly, I don't really want to hear it. As terrible as that sounds to say about a band I so love, I just don't think that this is really interesting musically. It's very sparse arrangement-wise, and I think it makes it dull and pretty boring overall. Not necessarily a bad song, because as I said, I appreciate what he's going for, but it isn't really anything that I would ever want to come back to either. And then we get Jet Skis on the Moat, which I gotta say, I love the organ flourishes on this track. Very reminiscent of something like Otis Redding or maybe The Doors even, but I just, yet again, the lyrics on here, like where he's saying, jet skis on the moat, they shot it on CinemaScope. It's like, what is he talking about? Like, what does this have to do, what does this picture of like jet skis on a moat have to do anything with a 1950s colored picture? I don't really understand what I'm saying. This is yet again Alex out-Turnering himself here. But overall, I mean, it is an enjoyable song because of the production elements of it. But really beyond that, I don't really have too much to say about it. Body Paint, on the other hand, I think is probably my favorite song on this album. And even that being said, I think it could be better. I don't quite love it. But I think musically it's the most ambitious song on this album. And especially, definitely from a structural standpoint, especially when you get to that second verse when the accented strings come in and kind of play underneath Alex's lyrics. And I really feel like it's a very well composed song. And just kind of how he's talking about like this lover who he's with and she's kind of having an affair and the insecurities that stem from that. I think lyrically it's a very interesting song, and I think easily the best cut on this album, and the second single off of it too, so I think they picked a good one there. Even if it isn't quite to that level that I think Arctic Monkeys singles should be at, but hey, whatever, that's what we got, and yeah, it is a really solid song overall. And then we get to the title track, which I think has a really super cool acoustic strumming pattern throughout the whole thing, especially, you know, being, you know, complemented by the lush string section. I think it's very similar to something Radiohead would do, but obviously Arctic Monkeys aren't as good as Radiohead. I think anybody knows that. But it's just one of those things where I think musically it really stands out from that level. Lyrically, it could be better. I think he's talking about nostalgia and whatnot, and I think probably the most nostalgia-ridden track in their catalog in some ways, but also at the same time, I don't feel like the lyrics really have that universality that some of their earlier songs do, where I think the message kind of gets lost within the song itself. And then we get Big Ideas, and I liked how they're talking about the past style once again and how they can't go back to it. And it's, you know, which is accented by this new sense of orchestration in the song and on this album in general. But then again, I mean, it's just one of those things where the arrangement itself is just not necessarily very interesting for me to even fully remember the song. But I think lyrically that this was one of the standouts on the album, and I appreciate it because of that. Hello You, yet again, I think that this is where we come to head with this problem once again, where he's like talking about like the Lego Napoleon movie. It's like, I think it was in a reference to the Lego Batman movie. It's like, oh, they should make a movie about the aborted Stanley Kubrick Napoleon project. And like stuff like that, I'm like, who's going to even know about that? Like, I'm a massive Stanley Kubrick fan. I didn't even know that. So just throwing in lines like that, I really feel like is a little too obtuse, and I think a perfect example of him being unrelatable to his audience. Once again, not the best song. I think it's one of the weaker cuts on the album. But I do like Mr. Schwartz, which has great acoustic guitar. Once again, very reminiscent of what I was talking about on the title track. But yet again, I do love Matt Helder's drumming on this thing, even though I feel like he's even being restrained because he's such a great drummer. I think one of the best out there, and I feel like this musical style that Alex is presenting the band with isn't really complimenting them in some ways. And I think Jamie Cook gets some good lines here and there throughout this entire album in the guitar realm of things. But I really feel like, you know, by the end, we get to the last song on here, and it's good, you know, or I mean, it's fine. That's the thing, I don't really have too much to say about it because nothing really stands out, and by this point in the album, I'm just kind of like, okay, cool, like I'm listening and I'm enjoying it enough, but Perfect Sense just doesn't really bring it to another level at all, and I think that this is the thing. This year's been so disappointing for music, I tell you, especially with artists I love. Because Kendrick, I mean, first off, was a huge disappointment. But I think at least with that record, it's at least memorable. And there's actually some really great cuts, some of the best in Kendrick's discography on that album. And I can't really say that about anything on The Car. So with that being said, I'm going to give The Car a 6 out of 10. I think this is an incredibly middling album. I do like it enough, obviously, but not to the point where I'm going to want to come back to this ever again. And honestly, like, I hate to say it, but like, I'm almost giving up on Arctic Monkeys because I just don't think that Alex is going to have that kind of drive to create something entirely new or something that is immediate, is their earlier stuff. I just don't think it's going to happen at this rate. It's just constant decline, even though I think that this is a slight improvement on their last album. I don't think it's better than AM, not by quite a bit. So it's just one of those things where, yeah, I'm probably going to listen to what they put out, but I'm not really going to be looking forward to it, you know. And it's unfortunate. I honestly think that, you know, Alex Turner should probably, because I know he's ventured out into directing a little bit. I would love to see him like create a screenplay or something, or like direct the movie, because maybe that would be another great creative outlet for him, because I think he's one of the most talented songwriters of his generation, and I think like at his absolute best, he is just an absolute monster. So yeah, that's The Car for you. Tell me what you thought about the Car in the comments below. I'd love to hear, you know, from other Arctic Monkey fans what they think about this album and whatnot. So of course, if you like what you're seeing here, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. I have another very disappointing music review coming very soon. So stay on the lookout for that. This has just been a horrible year, at least from what I've heard. But regardless, be on the lookout, and thank you for tuning in to this video. And of course, until next time, I will see you guys later.